Okay, so we're heading into week 4, and you had your first exam that many of you are going to finish by tonight, and um, you know, you will have a final then, and that's it. And so I just want to remind you guys that I've pointed out that this class, I want you to take the exam serious, but it's not set up. The way I have my class is if you are not doing the work and you do the exam well, as I've mentioned, that's not going to help you with your grade that much. If you do poorly on the exam, but you've been keeping up my work, you'll be fine. So, and in this class, I will admit, and some of you are actually in both of my classes, those of you who are extra hardcore at doing a lot of work, you'll notice that I gave this class the option of writing a paper instead of doing the exam if you wanted to, and not the other one. That was a last-minute decision. Why I didn't do that for both, it's a whole another topic. The point is, I just want to say that multiple choice is being pushed, and I've made this in my other announcement for my other class. There's a push to put multiple choice questions as a priority to measure people's intelligence about history. And for some reason, the students in this class are doing better on, you guys are doing better on your multiple, on this exam than some other classes that I have in the past. But this kind of leads me to the point that I've made, is that some people are great test takers, or maybe even sometimes the questions, maybe even in this book, are better geared to be remembered than, let's say, the way the other textbooks questions are formulated. I'm not mainly a fan of multiple choice, and this is the only multiple choice assignment you'll get from me. So just know that, and so just keep this in mind. Many of you are going to go into education, and you want to be professors and teachers as well. Keep in mind the difference between multiple choice and writing papers, and think about how much you're learning when it comes to writing papers, and what it's doing for you to just try to memorize information to get a multiple choice question answered. So, I'm hoping that this is also a kind of way of you to think about pedagogy for those of you who are going into education as well. Okay. Having said that, I want to move on to where we're at. My goodness, this cram course isn't as crammy as my 105, but my 105 that I'm teaching right now is Western civilization. So at least we're staying within the West mainly, and now we're doing also the legacy of imperialism, which brings the West out into world history more. And again, those of you who are taking both of my classes, you'll see some of repeat of what one class is doing with this one. And by the way, for those of you who are doing that, you can use the information. I realized that, like, for instance, this week we're both classes are watching the documentary on the Congo. Okay, so you can use the same information for both classes, by the way. But this section covers Latin America, Asia, and Africa, and it's just too much. It's too much. And so some of you might have more of an interest in one area, and you are going to be disappointed that I have very limited on Latin America, and then I don't have any assignments other than note-taking for the Far East Asia, but then work on Africa for the papers. This doesn't actually reflect my bias in any way. Here's how I'm kind of like strategizing this. I had to pick and choose. Do I try to get assignments for all 3 chapters, or what do I do? Well, the video notes, the reason why I give so much points for video notes is because I want you to see the value in watching the videos. In other words, I know you're not going to memorize everything we've covered. And I think that it's ambitious to get you to try to get your mind around Latin America, Far East Asia, and India and Africa. And Africa and India and China, by the way, in Far East Asia. There's multiple things within all of that. This is a lot of stuff. I just mainly want you to have some things kind of on your radar, hopefully, in the future. But this is very important history. China is actually penetrating quite heavily into Africa now as kind of a new imperial power within Africa. This time period that we're in doesn't get to that yet, and I might have you watch a documentary kind of addressing that before this class is over, if I can cram anything more into this class at all. But in any case, I think as China is on the rise, we're going to have more opportunities to learn more and more about, Far East Asia will be more of a topic. And Latin America should be. And Africa, despite how relevant it stays, it's like now we rarely think of the United States being involved in Africa, but we're actually quite involved in Africa. And the West's legacy in Africa is still felt. And I have these two documentaries that are long, but are worth your time if you're going to watch them. There's one on the Mahdi of Sudan. Now, I want to just say a few things about this documentary. It's biased, or it seems to me that it's trying to link or talk about the Mahdi in context to the modern terrorist movements that we're fighting now. And that works to a certain extent, but not entirely. And then it also talks about some saying that this was the purest form of Islam that ever existed. Well, who's that some? I have a lot of Muslim friends, and they're not praisers of the Mahdi of Sudan, just to clarify. But what was significant about this is several things. One, this was a movement against Britain's place in Africa. This was a this was an anti-imperialist movement, and it's not just a clash of values. It's about who gets a say in their own affairs or not. Now, in the case of the Mahdi, there was a promotion of slavery, and Charles Gordon, Chinese Charles Gordon, as you'll see in the documentary, was a crusader against slavery. What's interesting is that you'll notice, and you'll notice this with the Congo video as well, the British end slavery throughout their empire. But what I noticed in my classes, the pattern, is that they used the anti-slavery pitch to all of a sudden have an excuse to go in Africa to fight slavery. So in other words, African slave traders have been worked with for all this time, but now the British is against this idea, and Christian missionaries are now against this idea, and so as an excuse to stop what is at this point mainly Muslim slave traders, they're going to go in to save the day. In the case of the Congo, that's the pretext that's used by King Leopold, who I think is one of the most worst human beings of recent history, recent meaning 19th century. Okay. When people always talk about someone being like Hitler, what they really should be also mentioning first was Leopold. They should be saying Hitler was like Leopold. That should be our criteria for terrible. Okay, Stalin. Any of these kind of leaders, we should be looking at Leopold. And by the way, you don't see statues of Stalin everywhere in the Soviet Union anymore. Not in the way that we were before, for sure. And Hitler doesn't have a statue in Germany, but Belgium has statues of Leopold. You should think about that. Now, going back to the Sudan thing, I'm kind of all over the place. Chinese Charles Gordon was interesting because he also fought in China. That's why he was known as Chinese Charles Gordon. And I have a little link about the Taiping Rebellion in this week's set of reading and viewings. I just want to say this one brief thing about the Taiping Rebellion, which I wish I could cover. In the 19th century, around the time of the U.S. Civil War, China had a leader who literally had this vision that he was Jesus' brother. And he fused Chinese religion and mysticism in with Christianity, created a massive army, and led a major battle against the central government of China, which caused over 20 million people dead. It is a huge, huge battle. And this movement, the Taiping Rebellion, considers itself to be a Christian movement, but it was this bizarre cult-like movement, seeing him as Jesus' Chinese brother, basically, and used the Bible as a constitution. I mean, everybody should know more about it, and there's not a lot of information. The Chinese government doesn't like to talk about it too much. It's really wild. And so he helped squash this, Charles Gordon. And then that's why he was used. He was supposed to be able to help squash the Sudanese resistance in Africa. So I'm also trying to kind of show you how European imperialism, that whether it was in the Far East or it was in Africa, how interrelated all of these histories have been, often through unfortunate sets of reasons. Okay, so I don't. Hopefully, I didn't even overwhelm you too much with all the various things that I just said. But the bottom line is, if you can sit and watch these lectures I have, and take notes and watch these documentary videos, you will be armed with information that a good chunk of Americans don't have, and that I think really puts perspective on a lot of craziness in the world. Why is the Congo in such a mess right now, for example? When you see this documentary, you'll get it. The whole issue about Islam in the West, and the battles over who gets the last say in what in their own country. Again, it's all here. Now, from that, I want to say 4th of July is coming up, and I hope you have a great, safe, and enjoyable holiday. I also celebrate 4th of July, but as a person who's in the history, I loathe myths, nationalist myths. I loathe them in the sense that I think every nation has their sets of myths, and it's meant to create a stronger, united nation. But I think ultimately I cringe that anybody, collectively or individually, thinks that having a false sense of history is the best way to have a better existence. It just doesn't work for me. And for those of us who teach history, when it comes to each nation or nationalist historians, well, let me rephrase this. Many historians are kind of official propagandists of various regimes and nations. Okay, in other words, you write the history that the ruling class wants to be told to young children to imagine their state. In North Korea, children are taught that their founding leader took pine cones and turned them magically into grenades and threw them at the Japanese. That might seem comical to you, but it's a very great illustration for what I mean about founding myths. That leaders of regimes often would rather us have ideas that solidify, let's say, youth's belief in the system as opposed to reality. Okay? As if knowing reality is going to make you weaker, which to me is in a sense a kind of insecurity about what's real. So when it comes to the United States and the nature of our war for independence and what our relationship was with Britain and all these other kind of things, I just feel like that we could polish up our discussions a little bit better. I'm not saying that we're way off, but we have some things that we should think about. I'm going to post another video with this one by a Scottish conservative historian and economist. Neil Ferguson, his views on many things are not similar to mine. And keep in mind, even conservatives in America have different ideas than conservatives in the UK. But he does actually give advice to people like McCain and other U.S. politicians. He teaches in Harvard right now. He's a guy who's definitely controversial and taken serious at the same time. But he makes a statement when asked a question about if the U.S. is an empire that is really thought-provoking in context to what we're learning now about empires and imperialism and colonialism, and simultaneously to this idea of what we're celebrating on July 4th. So I think that you should watch this and then maybe use some of his points for discussions on your 4th of July party. You might get people riled up. If there's a lot of beer going on and guns, you might want to do it early on before everybody gets too riled up. But in any case, you'll find it interesting what he has to say, and I hope you have a great holiday and a great rest of your weekend. And always contact me if you need to. And yeah, that's it. All right.